The crystal chandelier above Sarah Mitchell's head cast dancing shadows across the white linen tablecloth, making the champagne in her glass shimmer like liquid gold. She sat perfectly still for a moment, watching the bubbles rise in elegant spirals, and allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in 2 long years. Happiness. "Sarah, sweetheart, why are you smiling like that?" She looked up to find her husband watching her with those warm brown eyes that had first caught her attention 6 months ago. Her husband. Even now, 2 weeks after their simple courthouse wedding, the word felt strange and wonderful in her mind. "I'm just looking at you," she said softly, "and realizing how lucky I am." David Sterling reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, his fingers strong and reassuring. "I'm the lucky one, Sarah. Trust me on that." The Grand Oak Room was everything its reputation promised. The most expensive restaurant in the city, where reservations took months, and the wine list read like a novel. Sarah had never imagined she'd be sitting here dressed in the simple black dress she'd bought just for tonight, feeling like she belonged. But David made her feel like she belonged everywhere. She thought back to that afternoon 6 months ago when everything had changed. It was a Tuesday, she remembered, because Tuesdays were always slow at the flower shop. She'd been in the back room trimming the stems of a fresh delivery of Peruvian lilies when the bell over the door had chimed. "Just a moment," she'd called out, finishing the last cut before wiping her hands on her apron and walking out front. And there he was, tall, maybe 6'1", with that distinguished salt and pepper hair that some men wore so well. He was wearing a charcoal suit that looked expensive but not showy, and he was studying the display of roses with an intensity that most customers didn't bother with. "Can I help you find something?" she'd asked. He'd turned, and when he smiled, something in her chest had tightened. "I hope so. I need flowers for my mother, but I'm hopeless at this sort of thing. What do you recommend?" Most men would have just grabbed roses and left. But David had listened as she explained the meanings of different flowers, had asked questions, had genuinely cared about getting it right. They'd talked for 20 minutes. When he finally left with a bouquet of white lilies and purple irises, she'd thought that was the end of it. But he'd come back the next week, not for flowers this time. "I was wondering," he'd said, looking almost nervous in a way that she'd found endearing. "If you'd like to get coffee sometime, I can't stop thinking about our conversation. About you, really." Sarah blinked, coming back to the present as the waiter appeared with their appetizers. She watched David thank the young man with genuine warmth, never condescending, always respectful. It was one of the 1,000 small things she loved about him. "You drifted away there for a minute," David said, picking up his fork. "Where did you go?" "Just remembering the day we met," Sarah admitted. "I was thinking about how different my life is now compared to 2 years ago." His expression softened with understanding. "Your parents?" She nodded. John and Mary Mitchell had died in a car accident on a rainy November night, hit by a drunk driver on their way home from dinner with friends. Sarah had been 34 years old, and suddenly she was an orphan. The word had seemed ridiculous at her age, but that's what she was. Alone in a way she'd never imagined possible. They'd left her their apartment in the Heritage Building downtown, a cozy 2-bedroom with hardwood floors and windows that caught the morning sun. And they'd left her their share in Bloom and Petals, the flower shop where she'd worked since college. But mostly they'd left her with silence. The kind of silence that pressed on your ears late at night and made you wonder if you'd ever feel whole again. "I was so lost," Sarah said quietly. "I went to work, came home and sat in that apartment surrounded by their things. I couldn't even think about dating. Couldn't imagine letting anyone in. And then this charming guy kept buying flowers he didn't need," David said with a gentle smile. "You bought daisies for 3 weeks straight." Sarah laughed. "Your mother must have had the most well-decorated house in the city." "Actually," David admitted, "I gave most of them to my coworkers. I wasn't really interested in the flowers, Sarah. I was interested in the woman who arranged them with so much care." The warmth in his voice made her heart squeeze. This was real. This was actually her life now. After 2 years of gray emptiness, she had color again. She had someone who looked at her the way David was looking at her right now, like she was something precious. The waiter returned with their main courses, and Sarah was grateful for the distraction from the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She cut into her salmon perfectly cooked and tried to focus on the present moment. The elegant restaurant, the man across from her, the future they were building together. "Mom called earlier. David said casually, spearing a piece of asparagus. She asked about the move again, when we're planning to bring your things over to the new condo. Sarah felt a small flutter of unease, though she couldn't quite name why. The condo was a beautiful 2-bedroom unit in a new development across town that David's mother, Catherine Sterling, had helped them secure. It had floor-to-ceiling windows, a modern kitchen, and a balcony overlooking the river. It was perfect. Except Sarah loved her apartment. Her parents' apartment. The place where she'd grown up, where she'd learned to ride a bike in the hallway when she was 5, where her mother had taught her to bake bread on Sunday afternoons. I was thinking, Sarah said carefully, maybe we could rent out the new place for a year, just until I'm ready to let go of the apartment. David's expression flickered with something she couldn't quite read. Disappointment? Frustration, but then he smiled and squeezed her hand. Of course, sweetheart, whatever you need. Although, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. My mother did mention something about the apartment. Did you ever look at those papers I gave you last week? Papers. Sarah frowned, trying to remember. The stack of documents from the county office, I left them on the kitchen counter. Just routine married couple stuff, utilities, registration, insurance, beneficiary updates, tax filing status. Remember, I flagged all the places where you needed to sign. Sarah had a vague memory of David arriving at her apartment with a leather portfolio slightly rushed, explaining that he needed to run these documents to various offices before they closed. She'd been arranging flowers for a wedding the next day, distracted by baby's breath and ribbon, and she'd barely glanced at the papers. You needed my signature for utilities, she asked. And some other routine things, David said easily. Property registration, that kind of thing. Just making sure we're properly set up as a married couple for tax purposes. My mother handled most of it, perks of having a mother who works at the housing authority. She knows all the shortcuts. Catherine Sterling, Deputy Chair of the Metropolitan Housing Authority. David spoke about his mother with obvious pride, and Sarah had to admit the woman was impressive. In her mid-60s, with silver-white hair worn in an elegant chignon, Catherine commanded respect wherever she went. She'd welcomed Sarah with open arms after the wedding, hugging her and saying, "Finally someone who can make my son smile like he deserves." I signed everything you flagged, Sarah said. Was that okay? I probably should have read them more carefully. No, that's fine, David assured her quickly. It's all standard stuff. I just wanted to make sure everything was properly filed. You know how bureaucracy is, miss one signature and you're stuck in red tape for months. The restaurant manager appeared at their table, an older man in an impeccably tailored suit whom David had greeted by name when they arrived. Mr. Sterling is everything to your satisfaction. Perfect as always, Victor, David said warmly. Please give my regards to the chef. The manager, Victor, beamed. Of course. And may I say it's wonderful to see you here with your lovely bride. Your mother speaks so highly of Mrs. Sterling. Thank you, Victor. We're very happy. After the manager left, Sarah noticed something she hadn't before. Is he related to you? He has the same last name. My older brother, actually, David said, and there was something tight in his voice. Half-brother, technically. Same mother, different fathers. He keeps a low profile, prefers the restaurant business over the family pressure cooker. I didn't know you had a brother, Sarah said, surprised. You've never mentioned him. We're not particularly close, David said shortly, then seemed to catch himself. Family politics. You know how it is. Victor made different choices than Mom wanted, and there's been some tension. But he's a good guy. Just complicated. Before Sarah could ask more, David's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen and his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I need to take this. Business thing someone's been calling all evening. On a Friday night, Sarah asked. International clients, David explained, already standing. They forget about time zones. I'll just step into the lobby for a minute. Order dessert if the waiter comes by. You love the raspberry tart here. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, and then he was gone, weaving through the tables toward the restaurant's entrance. Sarah watched him go, that small flutter of unease growing slightly larger. International clients. David had told her he worked in commercial real estate property investment consulting. But now that she thought about it, he'd always been vague about the specifics. She'd never visited his office, never met his co-workers. He worked from home most days, taking calls in the spare bedroom of his mother's house where he currently lived. Where he'd lived until the wedding. Where they both technically still lived, though Sarah had been spending most nights at her own apartment. The apartment she was apparently supposed to be moving out of, according to papers she couldn't quite remember signing. Sarah shook her head. She was being paranoid. This was David's sweet patient David, who had brought her back to life after 2 years of grief, who had courted her so carefully, never pushing, always respecting her boundaries, who had proposed on bended knee in the flower shop after hours with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. She took another sip of champagne and let her gaze wander around the elegant room. The grand oak room was living up to its reputation, every table occupied by well-dressed couples and small groups, the lighting perfect, the service impeccable. Old money and new success all gathered in this beautiful space. Her eyes stopped on a woman at the next table, an elderly woman, maybe 75, sitting alone with a cup of tea. She wasn't eating, just stirring her spoon in slow, methodical circles, and she was staring directly at Sarah. Sarah gave her a polite smile, the kind you offered strangers who happened to catch your eye, but the woman didn't smile back. Instead, her expression was, what, intense, frightened, urgent. Sarah looked away, uncomfortable, but she could still feel the woman's gaze on her like a physical weight. When she glanced back, the woman was still staring, and now she looked almost desperate. Do I know her? Sarah wondered. The face was vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Maybe a customer from the flower shop. They got so many people, and Sarah was terrible with faces unless she saw them regularly. The woman suddenly set down her teacup with enough force that it clinked loudly against the saucer. She started to stand up, pushing herself up from the table with both hands, and Sarah realized she was going to come over. Panic flared in Sarah's chest for reasons she couldn't name. She looked toward the lobby, hoping to see David returning, but he was nowhere in sight. When she looked back, the elderly woman was taking slow, deliberate steps toward her table. Up close, Sarah could see that the woman's hands were shaking. Her face was pale, almost gray, and there were deep shadows under her eyes. She looked like someone who hadn't slept properly in days, weeks, maybe longer. "Excuse me," Sarah started to say, but the woman cut her off. "Listen carefully." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but carried an intensity that made Sarah's skin prickle. "I don't have much time." The woman reached into her worn leather handbag, so different from the expensive accessories the other patrons carried, and pulled something out. An envelope, thick white with something bulky inside. She thrust it at Sarah with trembling hands. "Take this, right now." "I don't," Sarah began, confused. "My daughter married him 3 years ago." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "She's dead now. They killed her. And they're going to kill you too if you don't run. Right now." Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs. "What, I think you have me confused with—" "No." The woman grabbed Sarah's hand, her fingers ice cold and surprisingly strong. "I know exactly who you are. Sarah Mitchell from the flower shop. I'm Margaret Anderson. I buy orange gerbera daisies from you every month for my neighbor's birthday. You always remember to order extra." Sarah's mind reeled. Gerbera daisies. Margaret Anderson. Yes, she did remember now, the sweet elderly lady who came in like clockwork, always so polite, always grateful. But this frightened, desperate woman seemed like a completely different person. "Mrs. Anderson, I don't understand." "His name is David Sterling," Margaret interrupted urgently. "My daughter Jennifer married him in 2021. 1 month later, she drowned in a boating accident. But it wasn't an accident. He killed her for her property. And his mother made it all look legal." The envelope was still pressed against Sarah's palm. Margaret's hand covered it, pushing it toward her. "There's $2,000 in here. Take a taxi. Run. Don't go home. Don't trust anyone. Just run." "Mrs. Anderson, you're not well," Sarah said gently, though her heart was racing. "Let me call someone for you. I'm not crazy." The woman's voice rose slightly, and a few nearby diners glanced over. Margaret seemed to realize this and lowered her voice again. "Listen to me. Look at me. Do I look like I'm making this up?" Sarah looked. She saw genuine terror. She saw grief so deep it had carved lines into the woman's face. She saw the desperation of someone who absolutely believed that she was telling the truth. "Jennifer had a studio apartment her grandmother left her," Margaret whispered urgently. "He convinced her to sign it over to him. For their future, he said. 1 month later, she was dead and he owned everything. He sold it 3 weeks after her funeral. I couldn't prove anything. The police said it was an accident. But I know. A mother knows." Sarah's hands had started to shake. This was insane. This was some kind of mistake, some terrible confusion. David wouldn't, he couldn't. I've been watching you for months, Margaret continued. Ever since I saw him come into your shop, I recognized him immediately. I've been trying to find a way to warn you to get you alone. Tonight was the first chance I had. You're wrong, Sarah said, but her voice came out weak. David isn't. He's not like that. We're married. We're happy. Margaret's expression crumpled with pity. That's what Jennifer said, right up until the day she died. She pressed the envelope harder against Sarah's hand. Please, for your own life, run, now, before it's too late. Mrs. Anderson, they're here. Margaret's eyes went wide, looking past Sarah toward the restaurant entrance. Oh God, they're here. I have to go. Take the money. Use the bathroom window if you can. Just go, please. Before Sarah could respond, Margaret Anderson turned and walked away as quickly as her elderly legs could carry her, weaving between tables toward the side exit. Sarah sat frozen, the envelope heavy in her lap, her mind spinning. She looked up toward the entrance that Margaret had been staring at. 2 men stood just inside the doorway. Large men, both over 6 feet, with shaved heads and wearing dark leather jackets that seemed entirely wrong for the elegant atmosphere of the Grand Oak Room. They weren't looking around for a table. They were scanning the room systematically like security guards or what. One of them locked eyes with Sarah. He elbowed his companion, and both men started moving toward her table. Every instinct Sarah had developed in 36 years of life suddenly started screaming. She didn't think. She didn't analyze. She grabbed her purse, stuffed the envelope inside, and stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. The bathroom. Margaret had said something about a bathroom window. Sarah walked quickly toward the hallway she'd spotted earlier, where restrooms were discreetly tucked away behind a carved wooden door. She forced herself not to run, not to look back, even though she could feel those men's eyes tracking her movement across the room. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard it hurt. Her hands shook as she pushed open the door marked Ladies. The bathroom was empty, thank God, all white marble and gold fixtures and soft lighting that suddenly felt too bright, too exposed. Sarah fumbled with her phone, pulling up Uber. Her fingers didn't want to cooperate. It took 3 tries to enter her destination. Where should she go? Not home. Margaret had said not to go home, but where else? The only place she felt safe was the flower shop, her shop, Bloom and Petals, where she spent most of her waking hours, where she knew every corner and every hiding spot. A car was available, 3 minutes away, a white Ford Focus. Sarah looked around frantically. Margaret had mentioned a window. There, high on the wall, a frosted glass window about 2 feet square. Sarah climbed onto the marble vanity of the sink and looked up. Her heart sank. The window had thick metal bars embedded in the wall. There was no way out. A notification pinged on her phone. Your driver will arrive in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. She just had to get past those men and out the front door. She could do that. She could. A knock on the bathroom door made her jump so hard she nearly fell off the sink. Sarah, David's voice muffled through the wood. Honey, are you okay? You ran off so quickly. Sarah's throat closed. She looked at the locked door, then at her phone. 1 minute and 30 seconds until her Uber arrived. I'm fine, she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. Just feeling a little nauseated. The champagne, maybe. I'll be right out. Do you need help? Should I call someone? No, I'm fine. Just give me a minute. Silence. Then David's voice again, quieter, but she could still hear it. Victor, we might have a situation. My wife isn't feeling well. Could you? Sarah didn't hear the rest because her ears were suddenly filled with the sound of her own pulse thundering like drums. Victor Sterling, David's brother, the restaurant manager who had been so friendly, so welcoming. Were they all in on this? She pulled up the Uber app again. Your driver has arrived. Now or never. Sarah jumped down from the vanity, unlocked the door, and yanked it open. She'd expected to see David standing right there, but he must have stepped back because the hallway was empty. No, not empty. At the end of the hallway near where it opened back into the main dining room, she could see David talking quietly with his brother Victor. Neither of them was looking her way. Sarah turned and ran in the opposite direction toward what she hoped was another exit. She found a door marked Staff Only and pushed through it without hesitation. A narrow hallway lined with industrial shelving and cleaning supplies. Another door ahead with a glowing exit sign. Behind her, she heard David call out, Sarah, wait! But she was already pushing through the exit door into a service alley behind the restaurant. The cold November air hit her face like a slap. 20 feet away on the street, a white Ford Focus sat with its hazards blinking. Sarah ran toward it and yanked open the back door. "Drive, please, just drive." The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, looked alarmed. "Miss, are you okay?" "Please," Sarah gasped. "Please just go. I'll explain, just please." The man hesitated only a second before putting the car in gear. Sarah looked back through the rear window and saw David emerge from the service exit, his phone pressed to his ear, his face twisted with something that looked like fury. The elegant, patient David was gone. This man looked capable of anything. As the car pulled away from the curb, Sarah sank back into the seat and pressed her shaking hands against her face. Her phone buzzed with a text message. "David, Sarah, where are you? I'm worried. Please come back. We can talk about whatever's bothering you." Another buzz. "David, please don't listen to that confused old woman. She lost her daughter, and now she sees conspiracies everywhere. It's sad, but she needs help." How did he know about Margaret Anderson? Sarah's hands started shaking harder. She looked at the envelope in her purse, then at the driver's concerned eyes in the rearview mirror. "Where to Miss?" Sarah gave him the address of Bloom and Petals, the only place in the world that still felt like hers. The flower shop was dark when the Uber pulled up to the curb. Sarah paid the driver with some of Margaret Anderson's cash — she couldn't bring herself to think of it as her money — and watched his taillights disappear down the empty street before she let herself approach the front door. At nearly 10 o'clock on a Friday night, downtown was transitioning from business hours to bar hours. Most of the small shops on this block were closed, their windows dark, but down the street she could see the glow of the wine bar 3 doors down and hear the faint sound of laughter. Normal people having normal Friday nights. Sarah's hands shook as she unlocked the front door of Bloom and Petals. The familiar smell of earth and flowers usually brought her instant comfort, but tonight it felt wrong somehow. Invaded. Like even this space, her space, wasn't safe anymore. She locked the door behind her, turned the deadbolt, and engaged the chain lock that her father had installed 20 years ago. Then she made her way through the dark shop past the display refrigerators with their soft internal lights, making the flowers glow like something from a dream, toward the back room. This was where she did the real work. A long wooden table scarred from years of stem cutting and wire wrapping. Industrial shelving units holding vases and ribbons and foam blocks. An old laptop on a desk in the corner used mostly for inventory and orders. A small fridge that held the fancy chocolates she sometimes sold alongside arrangements. And in the far corner, a lumpy couch where she'd taken countless naps during long wedding weekends. Sarah sank onto that couch now and finally let herself fall apart. The tears came hard and fast, shaking her whole body. She pressed her face into one of the throw pillows to muffle the sound, not wanting to draw attention from anyone who might be walking past outside. Her mind kept replaying the evening in fractured pieces. Margaret Anderson's terrified face. "My daughter married him 3 years ago. She's dead now." David's voice outside the bathroom door, so concerned, so loving. "Sarah, honey, are you okay?" Those 2 large men scanning the restaurant. The way David had looked when he emerged into that alley. The fury on his face. "Please don't listen to that confused old woman." How had he known? How had he known what Margaret had said unless he'd been expecting it? Sarah forced herself to sit up and wipe her eyes. She needed to think clearly. She needed to understand what was happening. She pulled out her phone and stared at David's text messages. 2 more had arrived while she was crying. "David, I'm sorry if I scared you. I was just worried. Please tell me where you are so I know you're safe." "David, the police are asking questions about the incident at the restaurant. Please call me so we can straighten this out." The police? What incident? Sarah hadn't done anything illegal. She'd just left. That wasn't a crime. Unless David was making it a crime somehow. Sarah opened her banking app, something she hadn't checked in a few days. She'd been so busy with wedding preparations and work that she'd been putting off little tasks like that. But now, looking at her accounts, she felt her blood turn to ice. Checking account frozen. Status temporary hold due to suspicious activity report. Contact Sterling. David J. account co-holder. Sarah stared at the screen until the words blurred. When had David become a co-holder on her account? She remembered him mentioning something about adding him for convenience after they got married, about how married couples usually had joint accounts for household expenses. She'd thought he meant opening a new account together, not adding him to her existing one, but apparently she'd agreed to it. Signed something. Added him as a co-holder with full access. And now he'd locked her out of her own money. She tried her savings account. Same status. Frozen. Suspicious activity reported by David Sterling. Sarah's breath came in short, sharp gasps. This couldn't be happening. This was her money. Money her parents had left her from their life insurance policies. Money she'd saved from years of careful budgeting and overtime during wedding season. All of it. Locked. She had maybe $40 in her wallet beyond what Margaret had given her. That was it. That was all she had access to. Sarah forced herself to keep checking. Credit cards she tried to log into her Capital One account. The password didn't work. She tried again, certain she'd entered it correctly. The screen showed account access temporarily restricted. Please contact customer service. Her Visa. Same thing. Her stomach lurched, and for a horrible moment she thought she might actually vomit. She pressed her hand against her mouth and breathed slowly through her nose until the feeling passed. Think, Sarah. Think. Margaret's envelope. She dumped out the contents onto the couch. Cash as promised. 20 crisp $100 bills. $2,000. It felt like both a fortune and nothing at all. Her phone buzzed again. Not David this time, a number she didn't recognize. Unknown. Mrs. Sterling, this is Officer Patterson with the Metro Police. Your husband has filed a report regarding your disappearance from the Grand Oak Room this evening. We need to speak with you. Please call this number at your earliest convenience. Sarah's hands went numb. A police report. David had actually filed a police report, making her look like what an unstable person, someone who'd had a breakdown. Another text, this one from Emily Chen, her assistant at the flower shop. Emily. Sarah, your husband just called the shop looking for you. He sounded really worried. Are you okay? Where are you? Even Emily. He was calling everyone, painting a picture of a concerned husband and a troubled wife. Sarah stood up and started pacing. The back room suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. She needed to do something. She needed to take control of this situation before David controlled it completely. She pulled up a new browser window on the laptop and typed, Jennifer Hayes Anderson Death 2021. The results loaded immediately. The third link down was an obituary from the Chicago Tribune, dated July 15, 2021. Jennifer Marie Hayes, 28 of Chicago, passed away suddenly on July 12, 2021 in a tragic boating accident on Lake Michigan. Jennifer was a beloved daughter, friend, and devoted wife. She is survived by her mother, Margaret Anderson, her husband, David Sterling. Sarah's vision tunneled. She kept reading. Jennifer graduated from Northwestern University in 2015 with a degree in graphic design. She worked as a freelance designer and was known for her creativity and kindness. She married David Sterling in May 2021. Jennifer loved hiking vintage movies and her family's annual tradition of visiting Mackinac Island each summer. The obituary went on listing various family members and friends, but Sarah had stopped reading. Her mind had snagged on one detail: married in May 2021, died in July 2021. 2 months. She clicked on another link. A brief news article from a local Chicago station, Woman 28, drowns in Lake Michigan boating accident. Authorities responded to a distress call late Tuesday evening from a boat approximately 2 miles off the coast of Wilmette. David Sterling, 37, reported that his wife Jennifer had fallen overboard during a sudden storm. Despite search efforts throughout the night, Jennifer Hayes Sterling's body was recovered Wednesday morning. The death has been ruled accidental drowning. Mr. Sterling was treated for hypothermia and shock at Evanston Hospital and released. Sarah felt sick. She clicked back to the search results and tried different terms. David Sterling Real Estate Chicago. Nothing relevant came up. She tried David Sterling Commercial Property Investment. Still nothing. No LinkedIn profile, no company website, no professional directory listing. For someone who claimed to work in commercial real estate, David Sterling had remarkably little online presence. She tried Catherine Sterling Housing Authority and got better results. Multiple hits. Photos of David's mother at various civic events, city council meetings, ribbon cuttings. Catherine Sterling beaming beside the mayor. Catherine Sterling shaking hands with the governor. Catherine Sterling receiving a commendation for 20 years of exemplary public service. Sarah clicked on one of the photos and enlarged it. Catherine looked exactly as she had when Sarah met her 3 months ago. Perfectly coiffed silver hair, elegant suit, that smile that seemed warm but never quite reached her eyes. In the photo, she was standing beside a sign that read, Metropolitan Housing Authority, serving the community since 1955. The Housing Authority, where all property transactions were recorded, where deeds were filed, where sales were made official, and David's mother was the deputy chair. Sarah's phone rang, making her jump so hard she knocked over the mug of old coffee sitting on the desk. She looked at the screen. David. She let it ring through to voicemail. 30 seconds later, the voicemail notification appeared. She didn't want to listen, but she needed to know what he was saying. She pressed play. Sarah, David's voice was tight, controlled. I don't know what's going on or why you're doing this, but it's not funny anymore. That woman at the restaurant clearly upset you, and I understand that, but running away isn't the solution. I filed a missing person report because I'm genuinely worried about your safety. Please call me back. Please. We can work through whatever this is. I love you. The message ended. I love you. 3 weeks ago, those words had made her feel like she was floating. Now they made her skin crawl. Sarah looked at the time. 10:47 p.m. She couldn't stay here all night. Bloom and Petals had good locks, but it was still just a flower shop. If David really wanted to find her, this would be one of the first places he'd look. She needed to go somewhere safe, somewhere to sleep, to think, to figure out what to do next. She pulled up Google Maps and searched for hotels. The nice ones downtown were too expensive, easily $200 a night, and she needed to make Margaret's money last. But there was a budget motel about 2 miles away. The Starlight Inn. Reviews were mixed, but it was $55 a night, and right now she didn't care about thread count or breakfast buffets. Sarah gathered her things, turned off the laptop, and took one last look around the back room. This had been her sanctuary for years. The place where she'd hidden from grief after her parents died, where she'd slowly rebuilt herself petal by petal. Now it felt like a trap. She let herself out the back door and stood in the alley for a moment, listening. No footsteps, no voices. Just the distant sound of Friday night revelry and the hum of traffic from the main street. She called another Uber and waited in the shadows until the car arrived. Sarah didn't sleep much at the Starlight Inn. The mattress was lumpy. The walls were thin enough that she could hear her neighbor's television until past midnight, and every time she started to drift off, she'd jolt awake with her heart racing, certain she'd heard footsteps in the hallway. But it was safe. The door had a deadbolt and a chain, and nobody knew she was here. That was worth more than comfort. She'd turned off her phone around 11 o'clock, too afraid that David could somehow track her location through it. She didn't know if that was actually possible, but she wasn't taking chances. The phone sat on the nightstand like a dead thing, its blank screen reflecting nothing. When gray light finally started seeping through the thin curtains, Sarah gave up on sleep. She took a long shower in the tiny bathroom, trying to wash away the surreal horror of the previous night, then dressed in the same clothes she'd worn to the restaurant. They smelled like salmon and champagne and fear. She counted Margaret's money again. She'd given the Uber driver $20 last night and paid $55 for the room. That left $1,925. It sounded like a lot until you realized it was all you had in the world. At 7 a.m., Sarah turned her phone back on. It immediately began buzzing with notifications. 11 missed calls, 16 text messages, 3 voicemails. Most of them were from David, increasingly desperate. David, 11:34 p.m. Sarah, please, I'm losing my mind here. Just tell me you're okay. David, 12:15 a.m. I'm sorry for whatever I did. We can fix this. Please just come home. David, 1:47 a.m. I can't sleep knowing you're out there somewhere. Please. David, 3:22 a.m. I love you. Whatever's wrong, we can work through it. Please trust me. But there were also messages from other numbers, unknown, 11:52 p.m. Mrs. Sterling, Officer Patterson again. We're concerned for your welfare. Please contact us. Emily, 12:08 a.m. Sarah, I'm really worried. Your husband came by the shop. He was really upset. Please let me know you're okay. And one that made Sarah's blood run cold. Unknown to 15 a.m. Sarah Mitchell, this is Catherine Sterling. Whatever misunderstanding occurred tonight, I'm sure we can resolve it. David is beside himself. Please come to our home in the morning so we can talk like adults. Our home, meaning the house where Catherine lived, where David had lived until 2 weeks ago. The house Sarah had visited for dinner a dozen times, where Catherine had been so warm, so welcoming, calling her daughter, and talking about how happy she was that David had finally found someone. Sarah deleted the message without responding. There was one text she had to answer, though, Emily. Her assistant didn't deserve to be caught up in this. Sarah, I'm okay. Please don't worry. I'll explain everything soon. And please don't tell anyone if I contact you. I'm not in danger. I just need some space. She hesitated, then added, Has David been to the shop again? The response came within seconds. Emily must have been awake. Emily, no, just last night around 11. He seemed really worried about you. Are you sure everything's okay? Your message is kind of freaking me out. Sarah, I promise I'm safe. I'll call you later today. Sarah put the phone down before Emily could respond with more questions she couldn't answer. She needed to think. She needed to make a plan. But first she needed to see her apartment. The apartment. Her home. The place her parents had left her. The place she'd grown up. Whatever was happening, whatever David was planning, she still owned that apartment. It was in her name. He couldn't just take it from her. Could he? Sarah opened her banking app again, hoping the nightmare from last night had somehow been a glitch. But no, the accounts were still frozen. She tried calling this bank's customer service number, but it was 7:30 on a Saturday morning. She got a recording saying their offices would open at 9. Fine. She'd go to the apartment, get some fresh clothes, and her laptop, maybe grab the file folder where she kept important documents. Then she'd figure out what to do about the bank. Sarah checked out of the motel and caught the bus toward downtown. The Saturday morning streets were quiet, just early risers heading to coffee shops and farmers markets. Normal people with normal problems. The Heritage Building looked exactly as it always had, a beautiful old structure from the 1920s, red brick with decorative stonework around the windows. Sarah had played in front of this building as a child, had climbed these front steps thousands of times. Her whole life was contained within these walls. She used her key to enter the lobby and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor. Her door 3C was at the end of the hallway. As she approached it, she noticed something odd. There was noise coming from inside. Not loud noise, but the sound of someone moving around. Maybe a television playing softly. Had she left the TV on when she rushed out to meet David at the restaurant yesterday? She couldn't remember. Sarah inserted her key into the lock and turned it. It went about half an inch and stopped. She frowned and tried again, wiggling the key. Nothing. It was like something was blocking the lock mechanism from the inside. She tried the deadbolt. Same thing, the key wouldn't turn. Hello? She called through the door, knocking. Is someone in there? She heard footsteps inside. The television sound cut off. The deadbolt clicked, then the main lock and the door swung open. A woman Sarah had never seen before stood in the doorway. She was maybe 50 years old, wearing a faded bathrobe and fuzzy slippers, her hair in curlers. The smell of frying bacon wafted out from behind her. Can I help you? The woman asked, with a slight accent, Eastern European maybe. Sarah's mind went blank. This is my apartment. The woman's expression shifted from confusion to something harder. No, this is my apartment. I rent here. No! Sarah said, her voice rising. No, I live here. I've lived here for 2 years. This is my apartment. Who are you? I'm Maria Rodriguez. I rent this apartment from Mrs. Sterling. I have a lease. The woman started to close the door. If you don't leave, I will call police. Mrs. Sterling. Sarah's voice cracked. Catherine Sterling. Yes, my landlord. She is very nice lady. Now please go. No. Sarah pushed forward, trying to see past the woman into her apartment. She could see her furniture, her parents' couch, the bookshelf her father had built, the lamp her mother had loved. But there were also other things. Unfamiliar things. A different TV. Children's toys scattered on the floor. Pictures of strangers on the wall. This is my apartment. Sarah was yelling now, past caring about making a scene. That's my furniture. Those are my things. Doors were opening up and down the hallway. Sarah heard her name being called and turned to see Mrs. Davis from the apartment across the hall. Sarah, honey, what's going on? Mrs. Davis, thank God. Sarah's relief was overwhelming. Mrs. Davis had lived in this building for 30 years. She'd known Sarah's parents. She'd watched Sarah grow up. Please tell this woman this is my apartment. Mrs. Davis looked between Sarah and Maria Rodriguez, her expression troubled. Sarah, sweetie, are you feeling okay? What, I'm fine. I came home and this woman is in my apartment and she won't leave. Sarah, Mrs. Davis said gently, you don't live here anymore. You moved out. The hallway tilted. What? No, I didn't move out. I would never. Your husband explained it to us. Mrs. Davis continued, her voice full of pity. You had some financial troubles, and to protect the apartment from creditors, you sold it to his mother. Just temporarily, he said, until you get back on your feet. I didn't. Sarah couldn't get enough air. I wouldn't sell this apartment. I wouldn't. Mrs. Sterling has been very kind, Maria Rodriguez added. She rent to me at good price. She show me the papers. All legal. Papers? What papers? The sound of footsteps on the stairs made everyone turn. David appeared at the top of the stairwell, followed by his mother, Catherine. David was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, but he looked haggard, like he'd been up all night. Catherine, by contrast, looked immaculate in a cream-colored pantsuit, her silver hair perfect despite the early hour. Sarah, David's face flooded with relief. Thank God. We've been so worried. Don't, Sarah said, backing away. Don't come near me. Catherine placed a gentle hand on David's arm and stepped forward herself. Sarah, dear, please. Whatever upset you last night, we can talk about it calmly. This woman says I sold her my apartment, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Did you do this? Did you take my home? Sold me? Catherine looked confused. Sarah, you didn't sell me the apartment. You gave me power of attorney to handle the sale to protect it from your creditors. Don't you remember? We talked about this last month when you were having those financial difficulties. I don't have financial difficulties. I don't have creditors. Honey, Catherine's voice was infinitely patient. You've been under so much stress. The wedding, grieving your parents, trying to manage the flower shop. David told me you've been having trouble sleeping. Maybe you don't remember. I remember fine, Sarah was shouting now. Other doors were opening. Mr. Nelson from upstairs, the young couple from 3A. Everyone staring. David pulled a leather folder from his messenger bag. Sarah, please, just look at this. Maybe it'll help you remember. He held out several pages of official-looking documents. Sarah snatched them from his hand, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. Words jumped out at her. Power of attorney, transfer of real property, in consideration of debts owed. And there at the bottom of the last page was her signature. Sarah Mitchell, in her handwriting. She stared at it, her mind refusing to process what she was seeing. I didn't sign this, she whispered. Sarah, that's your signature, David said gently. I was there when you signed it. Remember last Tuesday night at the apartment? You'd had some wine and we were going through paperwork for the accountant. No. But even as she said it, a memory flickered. Tuesday night. David had brought wine. They'd sat at the kitchen table and he'd had a stack of papers. Just sign here and here and here, he'd said. Tax stuff, insurance stuff, boring adult paperwork. She'd been arranging flowers for a funeral, distracted and sad, and she'd signed where he pointed without really looking. You used my grief, Sarah said, her voice breaking. You got me drunk and made me sign away my home. You weren't drunk, David said, but there was something in his voice now, something cold underneath the concern. You were clear-headed and aware. You knew exactly what you were signing. But even if I was confused, Catherine interjected smoothly, we can reverse it. The sale to Mrs. Rodriguez can be undone. Sarah, dear, why don't you come home with us? We'll sort all this out. You're clearly exhausted. She reached for Sarah's arm, and Sarah jerked away. Don't touch me. Sarah, Mrs. Davis said from her doorway, maybe you should go with them. You don't look well. I'm fine. Sarah backed further down the hallway. I'm completely fine. You're acting like I'm crazy, but I'm not crazy. Of course you're not crazy, Catherine said in that same patient, condescending tone. You're just stressed. It's understandable. Come with us. We'll get you some rest. Margaret Anderson told me, Sarah said desperately. She told me what you did, what you both did. Her daughter Jennifer, she married him, and then she died, and he took everything. Catherine's expression flickered just for a second, but Sarah saw it. A flash of something hard and cold. Oh, Sarah, David said, and now his voice was definitely cold. Did that poor confused woman at the restaurant put these ideas in your head? Mrs. Anderson is not well. She's been harassing us for years with her conspiracy theories. Jennifer's death was a tragic accident. The police investigated thoroughly. You're lying, Sarah said. I think, Catherine said, her voice taking on an edge of steel, that we need to involve medical professionals. Sarah is clearly having some kind of episode. David, call Dr. Morrison. Tell him we need a psychiatric evaluation. No. Sarah turned and ran. She didn't know where she was going, just away. Down the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the stairwell. She heard David calling after her, heard Catherine's sharp voice saying something about catching her. Sarah burst through the front door of the building and onto the street. It was almost 9 o'clock now, and downtown was waking up. People on the sidewalks, cars passing, witnesses. She ran 3 blocks before she had to stop, doubled over, gasping for air. Her phone was buzzing in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw David's name. She declined the call. It rang again immediately. Sarah turned off the phone and leaned against the brick wall of a bank, trying to think. They'd taken her apartment. They'd taken her money. They were trying to make her look crazy. And the only person who believed her was a 72-year-old woman who'd lost her daughter to these same people. Sarah needed to find Margaret Anderson. She needed to know the whole story. She needed evidence that even the police couldn't ignore. And she needed to do it before David and his mother found a way to lock her up. The Starlight Inn had become Sarah's temporary home by necessity, if not by choice. She paid for another night $55 that hurt to spend and sat on the edge of the lumpy bed trying to figure out her next move. Her phone turned back on after an hour of walking in circles around downtown had exploded with messages. Most were from David, ranging from concerned to angry to pleading. A few were from Emily asking if she was okay. One was from Officer Patterson, now calling this an official missing person case. But none were from Margaret Anderson. Sarah had Margaret's phone number. It was in the flower shop's customer database. She'd looked it up last night, but had been too afraid to call. Now, sitting in the motel room with afternoon light slanting through the grimy windows, she knew she had no choice. She dialed. The phone rang 4 times before a tired voice answered. Hello, Mrs. Anderson. It's Sarah Mitchell, from the restaurant. A sharp intake of breath. Oh, thank God. You're alive. I've been so worried. When I saw them go after you. I got away, Sarah said. I took a taxi like you said. But Mrs. Anderson, I need to talk to you. I need to understand what's happening. There was a long pause. Sarah could hear Margaret breathing on the other end of the line, could almost feel her weighing the risks. Where are you? Margaret finally asked. Sarah gave her the address of the motel, half expecting the older woman to tell her it was too dangerous that they couldn't meet. But instead, Margaret said, Stay there. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming to you. 40 minutes later, there was a soft knock on Sarah's door. Sarah checked through the peephole and saw Margaret Anderson standing in the dingy hallway wearing a worn brown coat and clutching her handbag like a lifeline. Sarah opened the door, and for a moment the 2 women just looked at each other. Then Margaret stepped inside, closed the door firmly behind her, and pulled Sarah into a hug. I'm so sorry, Margaret whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't warn you sooner. Sarah found herself crying for the first time since the previous night, not panicked tears, but something deeper. Grief for the life she'd lost, the future that had been stolen, the trust that had been shattered. When they finally pulled apart, Margaret guided Sarah to sit on the bed while she took the room's single chair. Up close in the harsh light of day, Margaret looked even more worn than she had at the restaurant. There were deep shadows under her eyes, and her hands shook as she set down her handbag. Tell me about Jennifer, Sarah said. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She took a breath and began. Jennifer was my only child. My miracle baby. I had her when I was 44 years old, never thought I'd be a mother. She was everything. Bright, funny, talented. She went to Northwestern for graphic design. After graduation, she worked freelance, mostly doing website design and branding for small businesses. Margaret pulled a wallet from her purse and opened it to show Sarah a photo. A young woman with Margaret's eyes and a brilliant smile holding an orange gerbera daisy. She loved those flowers, Margaret said softly. They were so cheerful, she said. Full of joy. That's what she was like. Full of joy. When did she meet David? Sarah asked gently. January 2021. She was at a gym trying to get in shape for a friend's wedding. David was there acting like he couldn't figure out how to use one of the machines. Asked Jennifer for help. That's how it started. Margaret's face hardened. He was perfect. Absolutely perfect. Charming, attentive, interested in everything she said. He loved the same movies she did, the same music. He wanted to meet me right away, called me Mrs. Anderson in that respectful way. I thought, Her voice broke. I thought he was wonderful. What happened? Sarah whispered, though she already knew the answer would break her heart. They dated for 3 months. Then he proposed. Jennifer was over the moon. She called me at midnight, crying happy tears, saying she'd found her person. Margaret wiped her eyes. The wedding was small, just like yours. Courthouse ceremony. He said they didn't need a big fuss, that what mattered was their love. Sarah thought of her own courthouse wedding 2 weeks ago. How David had said the same thing. How she'd thought it was romantic. Jennifer had a studio apartment, Margaret continued. Nothing fancy, but it was hers. Her grandmother, my mother, had left it to her, paid off completely. Prime location in Lincoln Park, worth maybe $180,000. Let me guess, Sarah said bitterly. David convinced her to put it in his name. Margaret nodded. About 3 weeks after the wedding, he said it was for estate planning purposes, made it sound very mature and responsible. Jennifer trusted him completely. She signed the papers without even telling me. How did you find out? She mentioned it casually on the phone one day. I had a bad feeling. I can't explain it. Mother's intuition, maybe. So I asked to see the papers. Jennifer laughed at me, said I was being overprotective, but she showed me. And there it was. A quitclaim deed transferring the property entirely to David Sterling. She didn't even retain any ownership interest. Margaret's hands clenched into fists. I told her it was wrong, that no husband should ask his wife to sign away her only asset. We fought about it. She said I didn't trust her judgment, that I was trying to sabotage her happiness. We didn't speak for 2 weeks. What happened then? Sarah asked, though the dread in her stomach already knew. David suggested a romantic weekend. They rented a boat on Lake Michigan. It was July 12th, a beautiful day. They went out in the afternoon. Margaret's voice had gone flat, emotionless. At 8:47 p.m., the Coast Guard received a distress call. David saying his wife had fallen overboard during a sudden storm. By the time they got there, Jennifer was gone. Did they find her? The next morning. Her body had washed up on a beach near Wilmette. The medical examiner ruled it accidental drowning. David was treated for hypothermia and shock. He played the grieving widower perfectly. But you didn't believe it, Sarah said. Jennifer was a strong swimmer. She'd taken lessons her whole childhood, was on the swim team in high school. And there was no storm that day. I checked weather records. The lake was calm. But David said they'd gone far out, that a squall came up suddenly, that Jennifer panicked and went overboard before he could stop her. Margaret pulled more papers from her handbag, printouts of weather reports showing clear skies of Jennifer's high school swim team records of the death certificate. I tried to get the police to investigate, Margaret said. They were patient at first, but they had David's statement, they had the weather report from his boat's navigation system showing a storm, they had a body consistent with drowning. They told me I was in denial, that I needed to accept my daughter's death. The navigation system, Sarah said slowly. Could that be faked? I don't know. I'm not a technical expert. But I know my daughter didn't drown because of panic. I know David Sterling killed her, even if I can't prove how. What happened to the apartment? Margaret's expression turned bitter. 3 weeks after the funeral, David sold it. He was the sole owner, so he didn't need anyone's permission. He got $185,000, and because Jennifer had recently taken out a life insurance policy at David's suggestion, there was another $250,000 that went to him as the beneficiary. Sarah felt sick. So he made $435,000, almost $500,000 for 2 months of marriage. Margaret looked directly at Sarah. And that's when I started digging. I hired a private investigator, cost me my entire savings, but I had to know. And he found things. What things? David Sterling has almost no digital footprint before 2018. No social media, no employment records, no property ownership. It's like he didn't exist. But the investigator found hints of other names, other women. We couldn't prove anything, but there were patterns. Margaret pulled out a worn notebook. Patricia Chen, 2019, married David for 6 months before dying of an apparent drug overdose. She owned a house worth $580,000. Never touched drugs in her life, according to her family. Rebecca Miller, 2018, married David for 4 months before dying in a single car accident. She had a condo worth $340,000. And there were others. Women who disappeared after brief marriages. Women whose assets were transferred to David Sterling just before their deaths. Sarah stared at the notebook at the names written in Margaret's shaky handwriting. How many? I found evidence of at least 4 others besides Jennifer, but I think there are more. I think this has been going on for years, maybe a decade or more. And his mother, Sarah said. Catherine Sterling. She works at the Housing Authority. Deputy Chair, Margaret confirmed, which means she has access to every property database in the city. She can verify documents, notarize signatures, make fake transfers look completely legitimate. She's the one who makes it all work. David finds the victims, woos them, gets them to sign over their property. Then they die in convenient accidents, and Catherine makes sure all the paperwork is perfect. But why? Sarah asked desperately. Why do this? If Catherine has a good job, if David can money, Margaret said simply. Pure greed. Think about it. They've probably made millions over the years. And it's nearly impossible to catch them because everything looks legal. The victims signed the papers voluntarily. The deaths are ruled accidental. The property transfers are all properly recorded. There's no obvious crime. Until someone looks at the pattern, Sarah said slowly. Exactly. But who's going to look? Each case is in a different jurisdiction. The victims' families are grieving, not investigating. And even when someone like me raises questions, we're written off as conspiracy theorists. Crazy old women who can't accept tragedy. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes intense. Sarah, you're still alive. That means you have something. I didn't have a chance to stop them before they kill you. But you have to be smart. They're going to try to paint you as unstable. They're going to say you're having a breakdown. They've probably already started. Sarah thought of David's messages, Officer Patterson calling about a missing person report, Catherine's suggestion about psychiatric evaluation. They have, she whispered. Then you need to be even smarter. You need evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. The kind that even Catherine Sterling's position can't make disappear. How? Sarah felt helpless. They've taken my apartment, frozen. My money, turned everyone against me. What evidence can I possibly get? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, there has to be a record. Somewhere Catherine keeps track of all this. People like her, control freaks, perfectionists, they keep records. They need to know every detail of every transaction. It gives them a sense of power. You think she has some kind of, what, a ledger? A list of victims. I think she has something. And I think it's probably in her office at the Housing Authority. That's her kingdom. That's where she'd keep her most important secrets. Sarah shook her head. I can't break into a government building. That's insane. Is it more insane than letting them kill you? Margaret asked quietly. The two women sat in silence, both knowing that the situation had gone far beyond normal solutions. The police wouldn't help. The legal system was already being manipulated against Sarah. Her friends and neighbors had been turned into witnesses to her instability. I have a cousin, Margaret finally said. She works as a cleaner at the Housing Authority, night shift. She's mentioned that Catherine is paranoid about her office, always makes sure everything is locked up tight, but the cleaning staff has master keys. You want me to steal a key from a custodian? Sarah asked incredulously. I want you to survive, Margaret said. And I want justice for Jennifer, and for all the other women David and Catherine have murdered. Sarah looked at the older woman, this grieving mother who had lost everything but hadn't given up, who had been called crazy and ignored and dismissed, but who had spent years searching for the truth. If I do this, Sarah said slowly, and if I find this evidence, what then? We just take it to the police. No, Margaret said firmly. We go public. We go to the media. We make it impossible for them to cover this up. But first we need proof. Real concrete proof. Sarah thought about David's texts, his calls, his concerned husband act. She thought about Catherine's patient voice suggesting psychiatric help. She thought about her apartment with a stranger living in it. Her accounts frozen, her entire life dismantled in less than 24 hours. Okay, she said. Tell me about your cousin. Margaret's cousin was named Minh Nguyen, and she was terrified. They met her on Sunday afternoon at a Vietnamese restaurant on the north side of town, far from where David or Catherine might accidentally spot them. Minh was a tiny woman in her 50s with worry lines etched deep around her eyes. She spoke in a low, urgent voice, constantly glancing at the door. You don't understand, Minh said in heavily accented English. Mrs. Sterling, she is a very powerful woman, very connected. If she finds out I help you, she won't find out, Margaret assured her. We'll be careful. Last year, a coworker talked to a reporter about something small, nothing important. Next week, she was fired. Mrs. Sterling has, how you say, friends everywhere. Sarah leaned forward. Min, I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But Mrs. Sterling and her son are criminals. They've killed at least 5 women, maybe more, and I'm going to be next if we don't stop them. Min's eyes widened. Killed, you mean murdered? Yes, Margaret said softly. Including my daughter, your cousin Jennifer. Min had known Jennifer as a teenager, had attended her funeral. Now her face crumpled with grief and anger. Miss Jennifer was so kind, so sweet, always helping people. Then help us help her, Sarah pleaded. We need to get into Catherine Sterling's office. We need to find proof of what they've done. Min was quiet for a long moment, her chopsticks trembling in her hand. Finally, she said, Sunday night. Building is most empty on Sunday night. Only security guard at main desk and cleaning crew. I work 3rd floor where executive offices are. What about cameras? Sarah asked. Many cameras, but in hallways only. No cameras inside offices, privacy rules. If you can get to 3rd floor without being seen, no cameras after that. How would we get past the security guard? Service entrance and back, Min said. We use for bringing in supplies, taking out trash. Guard never checks it. Sometimes we prop door open with brick so we can go out to smoke break. Margaret pulled out a small notebook and started writing. What time does your shift start? 11 p.m. Building closes at 9, but sometimes employees work late. By midnight, only cleaning crew. And you have a key to Catherine Sterling's office. Min nodded reluctantly. Master key. Opens all office doors on 3rd floor. Would you let us borrow it? Sarah asked gently. Just for a few hours. We'd give it back before your shift ends. I could lose my job. My family depends on my work. I know, and I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. Sarah reached across the table and took Min's hand. But if we don't do this, more women are going to die, and Catherine Sterling is going to keep getting away with it. Min looked at Margaret. You really think they killed Miss Jennifer? I know they did, Margaret said firmly. Another long silence. Then Min reached into her work bag and pulled out a key ring. She removed one key and slid it across the table to Sarah. Return it tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. before I clock out. Meet me at same service entrance. Sarah picked up the key. It felt heavier than it should, weighed down by everything it represented. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet, Min said darkly. If you get caught, I never saw you. I know nothing. After Min left, Sarah and Margaret sat in the restaurant for another hour planning. They couldn't just walk into the housing authority and start searching. They needed to be prepared, know what they were looking for, have an exit strategy. Catherine keeps everything locked up tight, Margaret said, studying the notes she'd taken. If she has a record of her victims, it won't just be sitting on her desk. It'll be hidden somewhere. A safe, Sarah suggested. Maybe, or a locked drawer, or a private file cabinet. Even if we find something, how do we get it out? We can't just walk out carrying evidence. We photograph it, Margaret said. Your phone has a good camera, right? We take pictures of everything, every page. Even if they destroy the originals later, we'll have copies. Sarah pulled out her phone. Battery is at 47%. I'll need to charge it fully before we go. Bring a portable charger, too, and make sure the flash is turned off. We don't want light showing through the windows. They went over the plan again and again until Sarah felt like she could navigate the housing authority in her sleep. Service entrance. 3rd floor. Catherine's office. Search fast. Photograph everything. Get out. It sounded simple. It probably wouldn't be. What if we don't find anything? Sarah asked as they finally prepared to leave the restaurant. What if there is no record? What if Catherine is too smart to keep evidence? Then we're back where we started, Margaret said honestly. But somehow I don't think that's the case. Catherine Sterling is arrogant. She thinks she's untouchable. People like that always keep trophies. They want to remember their victories. Sarah thought about the woman she'd met 3 months ago. Catherine Sterling in her perfect suits with her perfect hair, accepting praise at civic functions. Catherine Sterling who ran the housing authority with rigid efficiency. Catherine Sterling who had welcomed Sarah into her home and called her daughter while plotting to steal everything she owned. She does think she's untouchable, Sarah agreed. So maybe she's gotten careless. Let's hope so, Margaret said. For all our sakes. That night, Sarah lay awake in her motel room, trying not to think about everything that could go wrong. She'd paid for one more night. Her cash supply was dwindling faster than she'd like, and she'd bought all black clothing from a nearby thrift store. Black jeans, black sweatshirt, black sneakers. She felt like a burglar in a bad movie. But this wasn't a movie. This was her life. And if she didn't do this, if she didn't find evidence of what the Sterlings were doing, she knew what would happen. David would find her. He'd be calm, concerned, convincing. He'd take her somewhere, his mother's house maybe, or a hospital. Somewhere she couldn't leave. And then eventually there would be an accident. Maybe she'd fall downstairs. Maybe she'd overdose on pills she didn't remember taking. Maybe she'd have a single car crash on a rainy night. And David would be the grieving widower telling everyone how he'd tried to help his troubled wife, how he'd seen the signs but hadn't acted fast enough. No, Sarah wasn't going to let that happen. At 10:30 p.m. on Sunday night, she dressed in her black clothes and met Margaret outside the motel. Margaret was also dressed in dark colors, looking like someone's grandmother trying to do yoga. "Are you sure you want to come?" Sarah asked. "This could be dangerous." "Jennifer was my daughter," Margaret said simply. "Where you go, I go." They took a taxi to within 3 blocks of the Housing Authority building, then walked the rest of the way. The downtown area was quiet on Sunday night, just a few restaurants still open, some late-night workers heading home. The Housing Authority building itself was dark except for a few scattered lights in the stairwells. They circled around to the service entrance Min had described. It was a plain metal door with no windows tucked into an alley that smelled of garbage and old concrete. There was no one around. "Now we wait," Margaret whispered. They didn't have to wait long. At 11:17 p.m., the door opened and 2 women in cleaning uniforms came out already lighting cigarettes. They were speaking in Spanish, laughing about something. One of them kicked a brick into the doorway to prop it open, then they walked a little way down the alley to smoke. "Now!" Margaret hissed. They moved quickly but quietly, slipping through the door before the cleaners could turn around. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. Inside was a concrete hallway lit by harsh fluorescent lights. It smelled like industrial cleaner and floor wax. Somewhere distant, she could hear the hum of machinery, maybe the building's HVAC system. Margaret pointed to a sign on the wall, "Stairwell B, floors 1-5. They moved toward it, walking as quietly as possible on the concrete floor. Every sound seemed magnified their breathing, their footsteps, the rustle of their clothes. The stairwell was narrow and utilitarian, nothing like the grand front staircase the building's visitors used. Sarah and Margaret climbed 2 flights, stopping at each landing to listen for voices or footsteps. But the building seemed almost empty. On the 3rd floor, they pushed through the stairwell door and found themselves in a carpeted hallway. This was the executive level with thick carpet that muffled sound and walls painted in muted professional colors. Nameplates on each door indicated different departments and office holders. At the far end of the hallway, they found it Catherine Sterling, Deputy Chair, Metropolitan Housing Authority. Sarah pulled out Min's key with shaking hands. This was it. Once they went through this door, there was no going back. They would be committing a crime, breaking and entering. Theft, maybe, if they took anything. If they were caught, Catherine would make sure they were prosecuted to the fullest extent. But they were already past the point of no return, weren't they? David had already stolen Sarah's apartment, her money, her reputation. Catherine had already helped him do it. This wasn't the beginning of the crime, it was the middle. Or maybe the end. Sarah slid the key into the lock. It turned smoothly. The door opened. Catherine Sterling's office was exactly what Sarah should have expected. Immaculate, perfectly organized. Not a paper out of place, not a pen lying at an angle. The desk was massive mahogany, polished to a mirror shine. Behind it, floor-to-ceiling windows showed a view of the city at night. On the wall to the left, a bookshelf held law books and government manuals arranged by size and color. On the wall to the right, Sarah stopped staring. The right wall was covered in photographs and plaques. Catherine with the mayor, Catherine with the governor, Catherine receiving awards, Catherine cutting ribbons at new housing developments. It was a monument to her career, to her power, to her carefully constructed public image. "Where do we start?" Margaret whispered. Sarah pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight function, keeping it aimed low. "The desk, I guess. Look for anything locked." They moved around the massive desk. Sarah tried the drawers. The top 3 opened easily, revealing office supplies files of current projects, a day planner. The bottom drawer was locked. "Look for a key," Sarah said. They searched the desktop, the penholder even checked under the desk pad. Nothing. "It's probably on her key ring," Margaret said. "We'll have to leave that drawer." Sarah moved to the filing cabinet in the corner. Also locked. The bookshelf held only books, no hidden compartments that she could find. "This is too clean," Sarah said quietly. "Nobody's office is this perfect. Where does she keep the real stuff?" Margaret was examining the wall of photographs more closely. She reached up and gently touched one of the frames, the largest one featuring Catherine, shaking hands with the county executive. "This one is crooked," she said. "Just slightly." Sarah came over to look. Margaret was right, the frame was tilted maybe 2 or 3 degrees to the left. In an office this obsessively organized, that seemed impossible, unless... Sarah reached up and carefully pulled the frame forward. Instead of coming off the wall, it swung out on hidden hinges like a door. Behind it was a wall safe. To be continued. The Gray Ledger, Part 2, The Hunt Word Count Target, 4,000 words, 10. Sarah stared at the wall safe, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. It was small, maybe 12 inches square, with a brushed steel face and a combination dial that gleamed dully in the light from her phone. "Can you open it?" Margaret whispered urgently. "I don't know the combination," Sarah said, her voice tight with frustration. "It could be anything." Margaret moved closer, examining the safe. "Try her birthday." "I don't know her birthday." "What about the year the Housing Authority was founded? That plaque on the wall, it says 1955. It was worth a try. Sarah reached for the dial with trembling fingers and slowly turned it. Right to 1, left past 1 to 9, right to 5, left to 5. She held her breath and tried the handle. Nothing. "Damn," Sarah muttered. She tried again, making sure she'd done it correctly. Still nothing. "What about David's birthday?" Margaret suggested. "Or her wedding anniversary?" "I don't know those either." Sarah wanted to scream. They'd gotten this far, found what had to be the hiding place, and now they were stuck. "We could be here all night trying combinations." "We don't have all night," Margaret said, glancing nervously at the door. "The cleaning crew will be on this floor soon." Sarah stepped back, looking at the wall of photographs and plaques again. There had to be a clue here somewhere. Catherine Sterling was a control freak, yes, but she was also practical. She wouldn't choose a combination she might forget. Her eyes landed on a large bronze plaque in an ornate frame, Metropolitan Housing Authority, founded 1955, Building Communities, Securing Futures, 1955. But she'd already tried that. Then Sarah noticed something else. In smaller text at the bottom of the plaque, "This building dedicated November 18th, 1955. November 18th, 1955. 11/18/55. Try 11855, Margaret said, clearly thinking the same thing. Sarah turned the dial again. Right to 1, left to 1, right to 8, left to 5, right to 5. This time when she pulled the handle, something inside the safe clicked. The door swung open. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed. Inside the safe, on a single shelf, sat a gray ledger. It was maybe 9 inches by 12 inches, bound in plain gray cloth with no writing on the cover. It looked old, but well-maintained, the kind of book someone had been writing in for years. Sarah reached in with shaking hands and pulled it out. The ledger was heavier than she'd expected, dense with pages. She set it on Catherine's desk and opened the cover. On the first page, in Catherine's neat, precise handwriting, was a title, Property Acquisitions, Private Record. Below that, a date, January 2015. "That's almost 10 years ago," Margaret whispered. "Oh God, Sarah. How many victims are there?" Sarah turned the page. What she saw made her stomach lurch. The ledger was organized like a business spreadsheet. Column headers across the top entry number, name DOB, property, perpetrator, status, payout, notes, and below that row after row of entries. Each one a life. Each one a woman who had trusted the wrong man. Sarah's hands shook as she read the first entry. Entry 01, Miller Rebecca J., 04/15/1975. Condo 2BR 847, Lakeshore Drive, Unit 3B, Sterling DJ. Closed. Property, $340,000. Insurance, $200,000. Total $540,000. Single vehicle accident. 11/2018. Police investigation closed. Clean. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. Clean. Catherine had written clean like she was reviewing a business transaction. That's the Rebecca Miller I told you about, Margaret said, leaning over Sarah's shoulder. Her sister Amanda said she never believed the accident story. Sarah turned to the next entry. Entry 02, Chen Patricia L. 0922, 1982, House 3 BR 2340 Oak Street, Sterling DJ. Closed. Property, $580,000. Insurance, $250,000. Total $830,000. Overdose prescription medication, 03/15/2019. Ruled accidental. Clean. Patricia Chen, Margaret whispered. Her brother Kevin told me she never touched pills. She was terrified of medication after their mother died of an overdose. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned to the third entry. She knew what she was going to see, but that didn't make it any easier. Entry 03, Hayes Jennifer M. 1108, 1993, Studio 1BR 156 Park Lane, Unit 7C, Sterling DJ. Closed. Property $180,000. Insurance $250,000. Total $430,000. Drowning 0712, 2021. Boating accident. Witness Sterling R.J. brother. Coast Guard investigation closed. Clean. Margaret made a sound like she'd been punched. Sarah put her arm around the older woman, feeling her shake with suppressed sobs. I'm so sorry, Sarah whispered. I'm so sorry. Keep going, Margaret said through her tears. We need to see all of it. Sarah turned more pages. Entry after entry. Women's names, addresses, methods of death, dollar amounts that made Sarah feel sick. Entry 04, Harrison Lisa M. Fell downstairs, $620,000. Entry 05, Foster Amanda K. Carbon monoxide poisoning, $490,000. Entry 06, Washington Nicole R. Hit and run, $705,000. Entry 07, Rodriguez Maria S. Apparent suicide, $380,000. 7 women, 7 deaths, over $4 million in combined property and insurance payouts. And then Sarah reached the 8th entry. Entry 08, Mitchell Sarah A. 0603-1989, 2BR Heritage Building Unit, 3C, Sterling DJ. In progress. Estantes property $420,000. Insurance $300,000. Total $720,000. Target secured. Property transfer complete 11/15. Insurance beneficiary updated 11/12. Final stage TBD. Subject monitoring. Recommend isolation protocol. Timeline 2 to 3 weeks. Sarah couldn't breathe. She was looking at her own death planned out in neat columns like a business expense. Final stage TBD. Margaret read over her shoulder, her voice shaking with rage. They haven't decided how to kill you yet. 2 to 3 weeks, Sarah said numbly. That's all the time I had left. But it wasn't just the entries themselves that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was what came after each one. Catherine had included supporting documentation photocopies of death certificates, police reports marked case closed, insurance payout receipts, property sale records. Everything meticulously filed and organized, and every single document bore official seals and signatures. Catherine's signature as notary public. Catherine's signature as housing authority official. Catherine's signature verifying, authenticating, legitimizing theft and murder. She kept everything, Sarah whispered. Every piece of evidence of what they did. Why would she do that? Control, Margaret said bitterly. People like Catherine need to document their power. Every victim is a trophy. Every dollar is proof of how smart they are, how untouchable. Sarah pulled out her phone. We need to photograph all of this. Every page. The sound of the camera seemed deafeningly loud in the quiet office. Sarah kept glancing at the door, expecting it to burst open at any second. She was halfway through entry 04 when she heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Not the soft shuffle of cleaning staff. Hard-soled shoes. Multiple people. Walking fast. Coming closer. Oh, God, Margaret breathed. They're coming. Sarah looked at her phone. She'd only photographed about half the ledger. She needed more time. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Hide, Sarah hissed. Under the desk. Now. But there was no time. The door handle turned. The door opened. And David Sterling walked in. David wasn't alone. Behind him stood his brother Robert Victor, the restaurant manager, looking significantly less friendly than he had at the Grand Oak Room. And between them, being half-dragged, half-carried, was a young woman Sarah recognized immediately. Emily Chen, her assistant from the flower shop. Emily's face was bruised. Her lip was split and bleeding. When she saw Sarah, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry," Emily sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. They found Min. They made me tell them. They said they'd hurt my family." Robert shoved Emily forward and she stumbled, barely catching herself on the edge of Catherine's desk. Sarah instinctively moved to help her, but David held up a hand. "Don't." His voice was cold, completely different from the warm, loving tone he'd used just 2 days ago. This was the real David Sterling. "Stay right where you are." Sarah's mind was racing. How had they known? How had they gotten here so fast? As if reading her thoughts, David smiled, but it wasn't the kind smile she'd fallen in love with. It was something predatory. "Did you really think we wouldn't be monitoring the building? We have security cameras at every entrance, Sarah, including the service door. The moment you and Mrs. Anderson slipped inside, we got an alert on our phones." "So all this time," Sarah said slowly, "you've been watching, waiting." "We wanted to catch you in the act," Robert said, speaking for the first time. His voice was rougher than David's, with an edge of cruelty. "Breaking and entering, theft of government documents. Can't have you claiming you're innocent when we have you on camera committing actual crimes." "Those aren't government documents," Margaret said, her voice shaking but defiant. She gestured at the open ledger on Catherine's desk. "That's a murder diary. Evidence of at least 7 homicides. David's eyes flicked to the safe, then to the ledger, and something dark crossed his face. "You actually found it. I told Mother she should have destroyed that thing years ago, but she insisted on keeping records." He shook his head. "Doesn't matter now. By the time we're done, nobody will believe a word you say." He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Mom, we have them. Your office. Yes, both of them. And they found the ledger." A pause. 10 minutes, perfect. We'll wait." Sarah looked at Margaret, then at Emily, still crying quietly by the desk, then back at David. They were trapped. The only exit was blocked by 2 large men, one of whom looked like he'd be perfectly happy to hurt them. "You can't do this," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "That ledger, I've already photographed it. Half of it anyway. If anything happens to us, those photos go to the police." "Do they?" David raised an eyebrow. "Let me see your phone." When Sarah didn't move, he nodded to Robert, who stepped forward menacingly. Sarah had no choice. She handed over her phone. David examined it for a moment, then smiled. "Password." "I'm not giving you Emily," David said calmly. "Come here." Emily shook her head, backing away, but Robert grabbed her arm and yanked her forward. David put his arm around Emily's shoulders in a gesture that would have looked friendly if not for the way Emily flinched. "Now, Sarah, you're going to give me that password, because if you don't, Robert is going to hurt Emily. Not badly, not yet. Just enough to convince you we're serious. Maybe he'll break a finger, maybe 2. "You're a monster," Margaret spat. "I'm a businessman," David corrected. "An entrepreneur, if you will. I identify assets, I acquire them, and I liquidate them for profit. The fact that the assets happen to be attached to women is merely logistical." He tightened his grip on Emily's shoulder, and she whimpered. "Password Sarah, now." Sarah's mind raced. If she gave him the password, he'd delete the photos and they'd have nothing. But if she didn't, Emily would get hurt. And it wouldn't stop there. They'd hurt Margaret next. Then Sarah herself. And in the end, David would get the password anyway. She needed to buy time. Think of something. Anything. "Fine," Sarah said. "But let Emily go first." "Not how this works." "Then we have a problem because I'm not—" The sound of breaking glass cut her off. Everyone whipped around to see Margaret Anderson holding the gray ledger in one hand and a heavy crystal paperweight in the other. She'd smashed the window behind Catherine's desk. "Nobody move," Margaret said, her voice steady despite her age. "Or I drop this ledger right out this window. We're 3 floors up. By the time you get downstairs, it'll be gone. I'll make sure of that." She was standing in the broken window frame, cold November air rushing in. The ledger was extended out over the drop. "Don't be stupid," David said, but there was alarm in his voice now. "You drop that, and you lose your only evidence." "But so do you," Margaret countered, "and I'd rather nobody have it than let you keep killing women." "Mrs. Anderson," Robert said, stepping forward slowly. Be reasonable. You're a 72-year-old woman. You've got arthritis in your hands. If you drop that ledger, you'll never get justice for your daughter." "Maybe not," Margaret agreed. "But at least I'll stop you from killing anyone else." David looked at Robert, some silent communication passing between them. Then Robert moved. He was fast for a big man. He lunged for Margaret, clearly intending to grab her before she could drop the ledger. But Margaret was faster. She pulled the ledger back from the window and swung it hard, hitting Robert in the face with the heavy book. He staggered back, cursing, hand going to his nose. In that moment of chaos, Margaret did something Sarah would never forget. She threw the ledger not out the window, but directly at Sarah. "Run!" Margaret screamed. Sarah caught the ledger on instinct. For a split second, everyone in the room was frozen. Then David lunged for her and Sarah ran. She didn't think, didn't plan, just clutched the ledger to her chest and sprinted for the door. Behind her, she heard David shouting, Robert cursing Margaret, yelling something Sarah couldn't make out. Sarah burst into the hallway and ran. She could hear footsteps pounding behind her. David was younger, faster. He'd catch her in seconds if she tried to outrun him. The stairwell. If she could get to the stairwell, maybe she could. A hand grabbed her shoulder, spinning her around. David's face was contorted with rage. "You stupid bitch," he snarled. "You think you can—" And then Margaret Anderson appeared behind him, swinging that crystal paperweight with everything she had. It connected with the back of David's head with a sickening thud. David's eyes went wide. His grip on Sarah's shoulder loosened. He dropped to his knees, then collapsed face first on the carpeted hallway floor. Margaret stood over him, breathing hard, the paperweight still in her hand. For a moment, she looked utterly terrifying, a small elderly woman who had just struck down a killer. "For Jennifer," Margaret said quietly. Then Robert was there, emerging from the office. He took one look at his brother unconscious on the floor and let out a roar of rage. "You old bitch!" He charged at Margaret like a bull. Margaret tried to swing the paperweight again, but Robert was too fast, too strong. He grabbed her wrist and twisted. Sarah heard the bone snap, heard Margaret scream. "No!" Sarah didn't think. She just acted. She swung the heavy ledger as hard as she could, hitting Robert in the side of the head. It wasn't enough to knock him out, but it made him stumble, loosening his grip on Margaret. Margaret wrenched free and stumbled toward Sarah. "Run!" Margaret gasped, cradling her broken wrist. "Sarah, run! Get that ledger out of here!" "I'm not leaving you. Go for Jennifer, for all of them, go!" Robert was getting to his feet, rage making him look almost inhuman, and from down the hall Sarah could hear more footsteps. Security, probably. Or worse, Catherine Sterling arriving to deal with this mess personally. Sarah looked at Margaret one more time. The older woman's face was twisted with pain, but her eyes were fierce. "Go," Margaret said again. "Make this mean something." Sarah ran. She clutched the ledger to her chest and sprinted down the hallway away from the executive offices. Behind her, she heard Robert shouting, heard Margaret's voice raised in defiance, heard more people entering the hallway. She just had to get it out of the building. Second floor. First floor. She burst out of the stairwell into the main lobby. The security guard at the front desk looked up in surprise. "Hey, you can't—" But Sarah was already running for the main entrance. The guard started to give chase, but he was old and overweight. Sarah hit the front doors at full speed, praying they'd open. They did, and then she was outside in the cold November night, running down the steps of the Housing Authority building with 7 women's deaths clutched against her chest. Behind her, she heard someone shout. More footsteps, but she didn't look back. She just ran. Sarah ran for 3 blocks before she had to stop, her lungs burning, her legs shaking. She ducked into an alley between 2 office buildings and pressed herself against the cold brick wall, trying to catch her breath. The ledger was still clutched against her chest. She'd made it out. She had the evidence. But Margaret? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Margaret had sacrificed herself. Broken her own wrist, let herself be captured just so Sarah could escape. And Emily was still up there too, bruised and terrified. Sarah pulled herself together. She couldn't fall apart now. She had to think. No phone, no money, her purse was still in Catherine's office. Just the clothes on her back and a ledger that proved 7 murders. 8 if you counted the attempted murder of Sarah herself. She needed to get somewhere safe. Somewhere she could figure out what to do next. But where she couldn't go back to the motel, David knew about it probably. She couldn't go to the flower shop. She couldn't go to her apartment, obviously. She had no friends she could call, not without a phone. She started walking, keeping to the shadows, the ledger tucked under her sweatshirt. Every car that passed made her flinch. Every person she saw made her want to hide. But she kept moving. 20 minutes later, she reached Bloom & Petals. The shop was dark, just like she'd left it. Sarah went to the back door. She'd left it unlocked in her haste to get to the housing authority, a mistake that now felt like a blessing. She slipped inside and locked the door behind her. For a moment, she just stood in the familiar darkness, breathing in the scent of flowers and earth. This place had been her sanctuary for so long. Now it felt like a hiding spot, temporary and fragile. She didn't dare turn on any lights. Instead, she used the dim glow from the street lamp outside to navigate to Emily's desk. She felt under the keyboard and found the $20 bill still taped there. $20. She'd escaped with proof of 7 murders and $20. Sarah sank into Emily's chair and carefully opened the ledger. In the dim light, she could just make out Catherine's precise handwriting. All those names. All those lives. She thought about Margaret probably being arrested right now, being painted as a crazy old woman who'd broken into a government building. Emily hurt and traumatized. David, who might have a concussion or worse from Margaret's paperweight. Good, a vicious part of Sarah thought. I hope she cracked his skull. But that thought scared her almost as much as everything else. She wasn't a violent person. She arranged flowers for weddings. She made people smile. And now she was sitting in the dark, glad that an elderly woman had hit her husband with a blunt object. What had her life become? Sarah's eyes landed on the old laptop on the back room desk. She'd used it to photograph half the ledger before David showed up. Those photos were on her phone, which David now had. But the laptop, could she use it to send the information somewhere to someone? She powered it up the screen bright in the darkness. She quickly dimmed it, paranoid about being seen from the street. The laptop was slow old. It took forever to boot up. Finally, she got to the desktop. She opened the browser and searched Chicago Tribune News Desk email. If she could just send someone the information, a reporter who might actually investigate. But how could she send photos without a phone? She could try to photograph the ledger pages with the laptop's webcam, but the quality would be terrible, and she'd need hours to do all the pages. Wait, scanning. There was an old scanner in the storage closet, something they used for warranty paperwork. If she could scan the pages, save them as PDFs, email them somewhere. It would take time, maybe an hour or more to scan everything. But what choice did she have? Sarah was pulling out the scanner when she heard it. A car pulling up outside the shop. She froze, listening. The engine cut off. Car doors opened. Voices. Checked her apartment already. She's not there. What about the parents' place? That is her apartment, you idiot. The one Mom sold. Well, where else would she go? David's voice. And Robert's. Sarah's blood turned to ice. They'd found her. Somehow they'd figured out she'd come here. The flower shop, David said. It's the only other place she knows well enough to hide. Footsteps approaching the front door. Sarah grabbed the ledger and ran for the back room. She could hear them trying the front door, finding it locked. Then footsteps moving around the building, coming for the back entrance, the back door, the one she'd left unlocked. She'd locked it when she came in, but they'd check it. And when they found it was unlocked before but locked now, they'd know someone was inside. She heard the back door handle jiggle, then David's voice. It's locked, but look, fresh scratches around the keyhole. She was here, recently. Is she still inside? Robert asked. Only one way to find out. The sound of breaking glass. They were coming in. She clutched the ledger to her chest and backed into the corner behind a shelf of supplies. It wasn't much of a hiding spot, but it was all she had. She could hear them inside now. In the shop, moving through the darkness. David's voice. Sarah, I know you're here. I can smell your fear. Why don't you come out? We can talk about this, like adults. She's got that ledger, Robert said. We need to get it back before she shows it to anyone. Oh, she won't show it to anyone, David said, and there was something terrible in his voice. After tonight, Sarah won't be showing anything to anyone. She'll be another tragic case. Mentally ill woman breaks into government building assaults, people then takes her own life in her flower shop. So sad. If only I'd been able to get her the help she needed. Sarah's hand closed around something on the shelf. A box cutter, used for opening cardboard boxes of supplies. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was something. The door to the back room opened. Sarah held her breath, pressed against the wall behind the shelf. Through the gap between boxes, she could see David's silhouette in the doorway, backlit by the streetlight coming through the shop windows. "Sarah," he called out, almost singing her name. Come out wherever you are." He took a step into the room, then another. Sarah's grip tightened on the box cutter. But before David could take another step, a voice called out from the front of the shop. "Police! This is Officer Mitchell responding to a silent alarm. Show yourself with your hands up." David froze. "Shit," he hissed to Robert. She must have triggered the alarm system when she broke in. But Sarah hadn't triggered any alarm. The shop didn't even have an alarm system. Her father had always said he couldn't afford it, which meant someone else had called the police. "Responding officers," the voice called again. "We're entering the premises." "Out the back," David whispered urgently. "Now?" Sarah heard them running, heard the back door bang open, footsteps fading into the alley. She waited, not daring to move. Was this real, or was it a trick? "Sarah Mitchell?" A woman's voice now closer, familiar somehow. "Sarah, it's okay. They're gone. You can come out." Slowly, Sarah emerged from behind the shelf. In the doorway stood a woman in plain clothes, jeans, and a jacket. She was maybe 45, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and a badge clipped to her belt. "My name is Detective Rebecca Walsh," the woman said gently. "I've been investigating the Sterlings for 8 months, and I think it's time we had a talk." Detective Rebecca Walsh locked the back door of Bloom and Petals and gestured for Sarah to sit down. In the dim light from the street lamp, Sarah could see the detective's face more clearly now, sharp, intelligent eyes that had seen too much lines around her mouth that spoke of years of frustration. "How did you find me?" Sarah asked, still clutching the gray ledger like a lifeline. "I've been following you since yesterday," Walsh admitted, pulling up Emily's desk chair. "After David filed that missing person report, I knew something was wrong. I've seen this pattern before with the Sterlings. The sudden marriage, the concerned husband, the unstable wife. It always ends the same way. Why didn't you stop them if you've been investigating?" "Because I had no proof," Walsh said, her voice heavy with frustration. "Every time I got close, evidence would disappear. Witnesses would recant their statements. Files would vanish from evidence rooms. Catherine Sterling has connections everywhere. The mayor's office, the prosecutor's office, even within the police department." Sarah's hands tightened on the ledger. "So you just watched while they killed women?" "I did everything I could within the law," Walsh said firmly. "I interviewed families of the victims. I reviewed death certificates and police reports. I tracked financial records. But everything looked legitimate. Perfect even. Too perfect. But I couldn't prove conspiracy without evidence that would hold up in court." She leaned forward, her eyes on the gray ledger. "Is that what I think it is?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Catherine's personal record. 8 women, 8 murders, 7 completed, 1 me in progress." Her voice cracked. "It's all here. Names, dates, methods, payouts. Everything." "Can I see it?" Sarah hesitated. This ledger was the only thing keeping her alive right now. If she gave it up even to a police detective, she'd have nothing. As if reading her thoughts, Walsh said, "Sarah, I know you have no reason to trust me. You don't know me. But I need you to understand something. I've spent 8 months of my life trying to stop the Sterlings. I've lost sleep. I've neglected my family. I've put my career at risk, pursuing this case when my superiors told me to let it go. And I've had to watch as they got away with murder again and again." She paused, her jaw tight. 3 months ago, I identified you as their next target. I saw David going into your flower shop, saw the pattern starting. I tried to warn you. I called the shop, left messages asking you to call me back. Did you ever get them?" Sarah thought back. She vaguely remembered Emily mentioning some detective calling asking questions. But David had been there that day, and he'd said something about it being routine follow-up on a break-in at a shop down the street. Sarah had never returned the call. "He intercepted the messages," Sarah realized. "David. He was there when you called." Walsh nodded grimly. "Of course he was. They're always 3 steps ahead. That's why I need that ledger, Sarah. It's the evidence I've been searching for. With that, I can finally stop them." Sarah looked down at the gray cloth cover at the careful record of Catherine Sterling's crimes. 7 women were dead because she'd kept this ledger hidden. How many more would die if Sarah didn't trust someone? "There's more," Sarah said quietly. "Margaret Anderson, Jennifer Hayes' mother. She's at the Housing Authority building right now. They arrested her. And my assistant Emily Chen, she's there too. They heard her. Made her tell them where I was. Walsh pulled out her phone. I'll call it in. Get units over there. They'll lie, Sarah said. David and Catherine. They'll say Margaret and I broke in, that we assaulted them, that Emily was helping us. They'll twist everything. Not if we have that ledger, Walsh said. Not if we can prove what they've really been doing. Sarah made her decision. She handed over the ledger. Walsh opened it carefully as if it were something sacred. Her eyes scanned the first page, then widened. She turned more pages, her expression growing darker with each entry. My God, she whispered. It's all here. Everything. She documented every single murder. She looked up at Sarah. This is it. This is what I've been searching for. With this, I can get arrest warrants. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and her expression changed. We need to move. Now. What, why? That was my partner. David Sterling just called 911 claiming you're holding hostages at this location. He's saying you're armed and dangerous, that you've already assaulted multiple people tonight. Sarah felt the world tilt. He's lying. I'm not I know, but uniform officers don't know that. They'll be responding to a hostage situation, which means they'll come in ready for violence. We need to get you out of here before... The sound of sirens cut her off. Multiple vehicles close and getting closer. Walsh grabbed Sarah's arm. Come on, back door. My car's in the alley. They ran through the dark shop, Sarah nearly tripping over a bucket of flowers in her haste. Walsh pushed open the back door, and they emerged into the alley. A plain sedan was parked 20 feet away, but they weren't alone in the alley. David Sterling stepped out from behind a dumpster, his phone in his hand. Blood matted his hair where Margaret had hit him, but his eyes were clear and cold. Going somewhere, detective? He asked calmly. Walsh's hand went to her gun, but David shook his head. I wouldn't. You're already on thin ice with the department for your obsession with my family. You pull that weapon on me, an unarmed civilian, and your career is over. You called in a false hostage report, Walsh said evenly. Did I was confused, traumatized. My wife assaulted me with a heavy object, detective. She's clearly having a mental health crisis. I was trying to get her help. The sirens were louder now. Red and blue lights flickered at the mouth of the alley. Sarah, David continued, his voice taking on that concerned tone she'd once found comforting. Please, come with me. Let me get you to a hospital. You need help. Stay away from me, Sarah said, backing up. You stole property from a government building, David said. You assaulted 2 people, including a police officer's brother. You're making this so much worse for yourself. Police officer's brother, Sarah repeated. David smiled. Didn't the detective mention Robert and I have friends in the department? Quite a few friends, actually. Some of them are probably pulling up right now. Walsh's grip on Sarah's arm tightened. Get in the car, she said quietly. Now. But it was too late. 4 police officers entered the alley from both ends, weapons drawn. Detective Walsh, one of them called. Step away from the suspect, Officer Chen, Walsh said calmly, not moving. I have the situation under control. Ms. Mitchell is not a threat. She's wanted for breaking and entering assault and making terrorist threats, Officer Chen said. He was young, maybe 25, and he looked nervous. We need you to step aside, detective. I'm conducting an investigation, Walsh said firmly. This woman is a witness, not a suspect. That's not what the report says. The report is false, Walsh interrupted. Filed by David Sterling, who is himself under investigation for multiple homicides. The officers exchanged glances. Officer Chen looked uncomfortable. Detective, we're going to need you to come down to the station. Captain Morrison wants to talk to you about your conduct in this investigation. Walsh's jaw clenched. Captain Morrison can wait. Right now I have evidence of... She has a book that belongs to my mother, David interrupted smoothly. Stolen from her office at the Housing Authority. We have security footage of the break-in. Ms. Mitchell and an accomplice forced entry, assaulted building security, and made off with confidential government documents. That's not what happened, Sarah protested. That book is evidence of murder. 7 women are dead because of him. Ma'am, Officer Chen said, please put your hands behind your head. Don't do it, Sarah, Walsh said quietly. Once they arrest you, the Sterlings will have access to you. You won't be safe. Detective Walsh, another officer said, older than Chen, and clearly in charge. This is out of your jurisdiction. We've been instructed to take both Ms. Mitchell and the evidence into custody. You can file your concerns through proper channels. My concerns: I have 8 months of investigative work showing a pattern of— Then you'll present that work to Captain Morrison, the officer said firmly, along with an explanation of why you've been conducting an unsanctioned investigation. Now step aside. Walsh looked at Sarah, and in her eyes, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. Helplessness. Walsh was a detective, someone who was supposed to have power and authority, but even she couldn't protect Sarah from the system the Sterlings had corrupted. Give me the ledger, Walsh said quietly to Sarah. I'll keep it safe. I promise. Sarah clutched the gray book to her chest. If she gave it up now, would she ever see it again? Or would it accidentally get lost in evidence? Would pages go missing? Would Catherine's connections make it disappear? Sarah, Walsh said urgently as the officers moved closer. Trust me, please. Sarah looked at David. He was smiling now, confident. He knew he'd won. Again. No, Sarah said. What? Walsh looked shocked. I'm not giving it up. Sarah's voice was steady despite her terror. Not to you, not to them, not until it's public, not until everyone knows what they did. Sarah, be reasonable. I'm being reasonable. You said it yourself, evidence disappears. Witnesses recant, files vanish. But this— She held up the ledger. This is the only thing keeping me alive right now. Officer Chen raised his weapon slightly. Ma'am, you need to hand over that evidence and put your hands up. This is your final warning. Shoot me then, Sarah said, surprised by her own words. Because I'm not giving this up. You'll have to take it from my dead hands. Sarah, don't— Walsh started. You want to know why I won't give it up? Sarah's voice rose, addressing all the officers now. Because David Sterling married me 6 months ago. He made me sign away my apartment, my life savings, my future. He froze my bank accounts. He took my home. And in 2 to 3 weeks, according to his mother's notes, he was going to kill me. Just like he killed Jennifer Hayes, and Patricia Chen, and Rebecca Miller, and 4 other women whose names are written in this book. She's delusional, David said calmly. Officer, please. My wife needs help. 7 women. Sarah continued, her voice shaking but determined. 7 women are dead, and if you take this evidence into custody, it will disappear. Just like all the other evidence disappeared, and I'll be number 8, and then there'll be a number 9 and a number 10, and it will never stop. Officer Chen looked uncertain now. Detective Walsh, is there any truth to these accusations? Walsh hesitated. Sarah could see her weighing her options: tell the truth and undermine her own investigation, or stay quiet and follow protocol. Yes, Walsh finally said. Everything she's saying is true. I've been investigating David and Catherine Sterling for 8 months. I have evidence of suspicious deaths, of financial irregularities, of a pattern that— Evidence that you've been told repeatedly does not support criminal charges, said a new voice. Everyone turned. A man in a suit was walking down the alley, 50s silver hair, the bearing of someone used to authority. Sarah didn't recognize him, but Walsh clearly did. Her face went pale. Captain Morrison, Walsh said. Detective Walsh, Morrison replied coldly. You were ordered to cease your investigation into the Sterling family 3 months ago. You were told that you were wasting department resources on conspiracy theories, and yet here you are in the middle of the night interfering with a legitimate arrest. Sir, if you just look at the evidence— I don't need to look at evidence. I need you to step aside and let these officers do their jobs. And then I need you to report to my office first thing Monday morning, where we'll be discussing your future with this department. Walsh's hands clenched into fists. You're making a mistake, Captain. The only mistake was letting you pursue this obsession as long as I did. Mr. Sterling, he nodded to David. I apologize for this disruption. We'll have your property returned to you shortly. Thank you, Captain, David said smoothly. I appreciate your department's professionalism. Sarah watched this exchange with growing horror. This was it. This was how the Sterlings got away with it. Not through violence or obvious corruption, but through connections, through respectability, through a system that believed men in expensive suits over desperate women. No, Sarah said again. Ma'am, Officer Chen said I really don't want to— Then don't, Sarah interrupted. Don't arrest me. Don't take this book. Don't help them get away with murder. Because that's what you'll be doing, all of you. You'll be accessories to murder. That's enough, Captain Morrison snapped. Officer Chen, place her under arrest. Use force if necessary. Officer Chen took a step forward, clearly unhappy but following orders. Sarah backed up until she felt the brick wall behind her. There was nowhere left to go. "Wait," said another voice. Everyone turned again. An older woman was walking down the alley, moving slowly but with determination. She was maybe 70, wearing a cardigan over a floral dress, and she was carrying a large framed photograph. "Who are you?" Captain Morrison demanded. "My name is Margaret Anderson," the woman said, "and I need to show you all something." But it wasn't Margaret. This woman was too short, her voice too high, and Margaret was supposed to be in custody at the housing authority. The woman held up the photograph. Even in the dim light, Sarah could see it clearly. A young woman with a bright smile holding a bouquet of orange gerbera daisies. "This is my niece, Jennifer Hayes," the woman said. "She died 3 years ago, drowned in a boating accident exactly 1 month after marrying David Sterling. And before she died, she signed over her apartment to him, her entire inheritance from her grandmother, $180,000 gone, and then she was gone." "Ma'am," Captain Morrison said with barely concealed impatience, "this isn't the time." "There are others here," the woman interrupted. She gestured behind her, and Sarah saw more people emerging into the alley. A man in his 30s holding another photograph. A woman in her 50s with tears on her face. More people all carrying pictures. "Rebecca Miller, my sister," the man said, holding up his photo. "Car accident, 4 months after marrying David Sterling." "Patricia Chen, my sister," the woman added. "Overdose. She never touched drugs in her life. 6 months after marrying David Sterling." More voices joined in. More names. More photos. The alley was filling with people with families of the dead, all holding pictures of smiling women who had trusted the wrong man. "What is this?" Captain Morrison looked around, confused and angry. "How did you all social media?" said a young woman near the back, holding up her phone. Detective Walsh's partner posted about what was happening here. Asked anyone with information about David Sterling to come down. So we came. All of us. All the families who were told it was an accident. All the families who were dismissed as conspiracy theorists. Sarah looked at Walsh, who was staring at her phone in surprise. She clearly hadn't known about this, but her partner had made a call, had decided that the truth was more important than protocol. "This is highly irregular," Captain Morrison sputtered. "All of you need to leave this area immediately." 7 women, Sarah said loudly, holding up the gray ledger. 7 women are dead, and it's all documented in this book. Names, dates, methods, payouts. Catherine Sterling kept a detailed record of every murder her son committed, every property stolen, every life destroyed. She looked directly at Officer Chen, who looked young enough to maybe still believe in justice. "You can arrest me," Sarah said. "You can take this book and hand it over to them, and it will disappear. And in a few weeks I'll die in a convenient accident, and you'll tell yourself you were just following orders, just doing your job. And David Sterling will find another lonely woman with property to steal. And it will keep happening, over and over." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Or," she continued, "you can let Detective Walsh do her job. You can look at this evidence, really look at it, and you can stop this. Right now. Tonight. You can save my life, and you can make sure these 7 women," she gestured to the photographs, "didn't die for nothing." Silence fell over the alley. Officer Chen looked at Captain Morrison, then at Detective Walsh, then at all the families holding their photos. His weapon lowered slightly. "Captain," he said quietly, "maybe we should look at what she has." "Officer Chen, I gave you an order." "With respect, sir, there are a lot of people here saying the same thing. A lot of dead women. Maybe we should at least investigate." "We have investigated," Morrison snapped. "Multiple times there's no evidence of—" "Then let me see the ledger," Walsh said, stepping forward. "Right here, right now, in front of everyone. If it's nothing, if Sarah is lying or delusional, we'll all see that. But if it's real—" She looked at Captain Morrison. "If it's real, sir, we need to act on it, no matter whose connections might be affected." Morrison's face had turned red. "You're out of line, Detective." "I'm trying to do my job, sir." For a long moment, no one moved. The standoff hung in the balance, justice on one side, corruption and convenience on the other. Then Officer Chen holstered his weapon. "I want to see it," he said firmly. "The ledger. I want to see what's in it." "Me too," said another officer. "And me," said a third. Captain Morrison looked around at his officers, at the families with their photographs, at Detective Walsh standing her ground. He was outnumbered. And more importantly, there were too many witnesses now. Whatever happened next would be public, would be recorded, would be impossible to cover up. "Fine," he said through clenched teeth. "Let's see this supposed evidence." Sarah took a deep breath and opened the gray ledger, and in the harsh light of police flashlights in front of dozens of witnesses, she showed them everything. The conference room at the police station was crowded. Sarah sat at one end of the long table, the gray ledger open in front of her. Detective Walsh sat beside her. Across the table, Captain Morrison and 3 other senior officers reviewed copies of the ledger pages that had been hastily photographed and printed. It was 4:37 a.m. Sarah had been at the station for 3 hours. 3 hours of explaining, of walking them through each entry, of watching skepticism slowly turn to horror on their faces. Entry 4, Captain Morrison read aloud, his voice tight. Lisa Harrison, March 2020. Died from a fall down the stairs in her home. Ruled accidental. David Sterling inherited her house worth $620,000. He looked up. "I remember this case. I was a lieutenant then. We investigated thoroughly. The medical examiner found no evidence of foul play." "Because Catherine Sterling falsified the autopsy report," Detective Walsh said. She pulled out another folder, 8 months of her investigation finally being taken seriously. "Look at the medical examiner's signature on the official report. Then look at this." She showed them a document. "This is a completely unrelated death certificate from 2 years earlier. See the ME's signature? It's different. The Harrison signature is a forgery." One of the other officers, a woman named Lieutenant Garcia, leaned forward. "Are you saying Catherine Sterling has the ability to forge medical documents?" "I'm saying she has connections throughout the city administration," Walsh replied. "She's been deputy chair of the Housing Authority for 20 years. She knows everyone. And more importantly, everyone owes her favors. A signature here, a lost file there. Small acts of corruption that seemed harmless individually, but enabled mass murder when combined. This is..." Captain Morrison looked sick. "If this is all true, we're looking at one of the worst serial killing operations in the city's history." "It's true," Sarah said quietly. "I'm living proof, or I would have been dead proof in 2 or 3 weeks." Morrison looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like sympathy in his eyes. "Ms. Mitchell, I owe you an apology. When David Sterling filed that missing person report yesterday, I accepted his story without question. I should have..." "You should have listened to Detective Walsh 8 months ago," Sarah interrupted. "But you didn't. Because David and Catherine are respectable. They're wealthy. They're connected. And the victims were just women. Isolated women without families or friends to advocate for them. Women no one would miss." The silence that followed was heavy with shame. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Are you going to arrest them?" Morrison looked at Walsh. "Detective, what do you need to build an airtight case?" Walsh pulled out a list she'd apparently been preparing for months. "First, we need to secure all of Catherine Sterling's records at the Housing Authority before she can destroy them. Second, we need to exhume bodies, at least 3 of the victims, where cause of death is suspicious. Third, we need to freeze all of David Sterling's financial accounts and trace the money. Fourth..." "Wait," Lieutenant Garcia interrupted. "Exhumations, that's going to require court orders, lots of them. And if the Sterlings get wind of what we're doing..." "Then we don't give them time to react," Walsh said firmly. "We move fast, tonight, right now. We get emergency warrants, we hit multiple locations simultaneously, we arrest both David and Catherine before dawn." "On what charges?" Captain Morrison asked. "The ledger is damning, but a defense attorney will argue it's inadmissible. It was obtained through an illegal search." "Actually, Sarah said I obtained it, not Detective Walsh. She wasn't involved in the break-in." "You just admitted to a felony," Morrison pointed out. "I know, but I'm willing to face those consequences if it means stopping them. Although," she looked at Walsh, "you said I was a witness. Could I argue I was conducting a citizen's investigation, that I had reason to believe evidence of a crime was being concealed?" "It's a stretch," Walsh admitted. "But it might work, especially if we can corroborate the ledger's contents with other evidence. The exhumations, the financial records, witness testimony from the victims' families." Morrison was quiet for a long moment, weighing options. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes, career risk versus doing the right thing. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him this wasn't complicated, that 7 women were dead, and another would die soon if he didn't act. But she stayed quiet. Let him think. Okay, Morrison finally said. Here's what we're going to do. Detective Walsh, you're officially back on the case. Lieutenant Garcia, you're second in command. I want teams assembled within the hour. One team goes to Catherine Sterling's home. One team goes to David Sterling's location. One team secures the Housing Authority building. We move simultaneously at 6 a.m. What about me? Sarah asked. Am I under arrest? Morrison looked at her for a long moment. Technically, yes. You broke into a government building. You assaulted at least one person. In self-defense, Walsh interjected. Maybe. Probably, Morrison conceded. But there are still charges. However, he glanced at the gray ledger. I'm going to offer you protective custody instead. You stay here in a secure room until we have the Sterlings in custody. After that, we'll see about those charges. Will I be able to testify? Sarah asked. Against them. If it goes to trial, yes. And Ms. Mitchell, you will likely be our star witness. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. After everything, the terror, the running, the desperate escape, someone was finally believing her. Someone was finally acting. What about Margaret Anderson? She asked suddenly. And my assistant Emily Chen, they were at the Housing Authority building. David and his brother Robert had them. We sent officers to check on them, Walsh said. Margaret Anderson was found in the building security office. She has a broken wrist and some bruising, but she's okay. She's being treated at Mercy Hospital. And Emily Chen was found in Catherine Sterling's office. She's shaken up, but physically she'll be fine. Were they arrested? Margaret was initially detained, but once we explained the situation, those charges were dropped. Emily wasn't charged with anything. It's clear she was coerced. Sarah felt a weight lift from her chest. Maggie was alive. Emily was safe. They hadn't sacrificed themselves for nothing. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for finally listening. Morrison stood up. Detective Walsh, assemble your teams. Lieutenant Garcia, start working on those warrant applications. I want everything ready by 5:30 a.m. Let's end this. As the officers filed out, Walsh stayed behind with Sarah. You did it, the detective said quietly. You got them. You got them. We did it, Sarah corrected. You believed me when no one else would. You've been fighting for justice for 8 months. But you're the one who found the evidence. You're the one who risked everything. Walsh shook her head in amazement. You're incredibly brave, Sarah Mitchell. I didn't feel brave, Sarah admitted. I felt terrified. I still feel terrified. That's what bravery is, Walsh said. Being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. A female officer appeared in the doorway. Miss Mitchell, we have a room ready for you. It's more comfortable than this conference room. You can rest, get some food. We'll keep you updated on everything. Sarah stood up, her legs shaky from exhaustion and adrenaline crash. As she walked toward the door, she turned back to look at the gray ledger still lying on the table. 7 women's names, 7 lives stolen, 7 families destroyed. But no more, not after tonight. Bring them down, Sarah said to Walsh. Bring them both down. Walsh smiled grimly. Count on it. The courtroom was packed. Sarah sat in the witness gallery watching as the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict. She was flanked by Margaret Anderson on one side and Emily Chen on the other. Behind them sat the families of the other victims, Amanda Miller, Kevin Chen, and others who had spent years believing their loved ones' deaths were accidents. In the case of the People versus David James Sterling, the foreman read, his voice steady. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Rebecca Miller, we find the defendant guilty. A gasp went through the courtroom. David, sitting at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, showed no reaction. But Sarah saw his mother Catherine, sitting in the gallery on the opposite side, close her eyes. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Patricia Chen, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of first-degree murder in the death of Jennifer Hayes, we find the defendant guilty. With each guilty verdict, Sarah felt something inside her unclenching. Justice. Real justice. It was actually happening. The foreman continued through all 7 murder counts. All guilty. Then through the fraud counts, the conspiracy counts, the insurance fraud counts. Guilty. 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 When it was done, David James Sterling had been convicted on 43 separate counts. The judge would sentence him next week, but everyone knew what the outcome would be. Life in prison. Multiple consecutive life sentences. He would die behind bars. Catherine Sterling's trial had concluded 2 weeks earlier with a similar result. The former deputy chair of the Housing Authority had been found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder fraud, abuse of public office forgery, and dozens of other charges. She too would spend the rest of her life in prison. As the judge dismissed the jury and the bailiffs led David away, Sarah finally let herself cry. Margaret put her arm around her, and Emily took her hand. "It's over," Margaret whispered. "It's finally over." But was it, Sarah wondered? 7 women were still dead. Families were still shattered. Lives were still destroyed. Guilty verdicts couldn't undo any of that, but they could prevent more deaths. They could show other women that they would be believed, that justice was possible, that monsters could be stopped. After the trial, Sarah walked out of the courthouse into bright May sunshine. Reporters clustered on the steps, shouting questions. Detective Walsh, now Sergeant Walsh, promoted for her work on the case, helped clear a path. "Ms. Mitchell, how does it feel to get justice?" "Ms. Mitchell, what will you do now?" Sarah paused at the top of the steps and turned to face the cameras. For 6 months, she'd avoided media attention as much as possible, but today she had something to say. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she began, her voice carrying across the crowd. "6 months ago, I was a florist who thought I'd found love. Instead, I found a predator. And if not for the bravery of Margaret Anderson, the dedication of Sergeant Rebecca Walsh, and the evidence in a gray ledger, I would be dead right now." She paused, letting that sink in. "But I'm not dead. I'm here. And David Sterling and Catherine Sterling are going to prison for the rest of their lives. And I want other women to know this. If someone seems too perfect, trust your instincts. If someone tries to isolate you from friends and family, that's a red flag. If someone asks you to sign over property or assets, get a lawyer first. Don't trust blindly. Don't ignore warning signs. Don't let charm and respectability blind you to danger." A reporter called out, "What will you do now?" Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile she'd felt in months. "I'm going back to my flowers. I'm going back to my life. But I'm also going to work with victims' advocacy groups to make sure no one else falls through the cracks the way I almost did." As she walked down the courthouse steps, surrounded by people who had believed her and fought for her, Sarah thought about the gray ledger that had saved her life. It was evidence now locked away in some police facility, but its contents would never be forgotten. 7 women's names were written in that ledger, 7 women who deserved to be remembered. Rebecca Miller, Patricia Chen, Jennifer Hayes, Lisa Harrison, Amanda Foster, Nicole Washington, Maria Rodriguez. Sarah would make sure the world knew their names, knew their stories, knew that they had mattered, and that their deaths had finally been avenged.